astronaut selection, astronaut training, life in space, anything on your mind, feel free to raise your hands and let me go ahead and lead it off. Kathy, we're seeing a big explosion, a big surge.
We don't say explosion.
No, we don't say that. We have a big surge in private corporations involved in spaceflight and low Earth orbit. Give us your thoughts about that. How do you think it's shaping up?
I think the commercial guys getting into low Earth orbit is awesome. That relieves, well, it hands over the job of transportation getting there from the government to commercial enterprises. Like, the government doesn't build every airplane we fly on. They contract seats and things like that, just like we do. And that frees up NASA to do more exploring, which is what NASA's job is, and to do things that will not have the return on investment that commercial entities require for their survival. So I think it is amazing that that's happening, and I'm a big cheerleader for them.
As far as government and national goals are concerned, as you said before, the ultimate goal is Mars. Is that right?
That's my goal.
Yeah.
I want to see people walking on Mars. And when I checked the Social Security life expectancy calculator, my expiration date is 2039, in April, to be precise. And so I have conceded that I will not walk on Mars, but I truly want to see it in my lifetime. So I'm hoping that they keep pressing forward with that so that I'll have a chance to see it.
I will remind you this show is all about you, so please feel free to ask questions. Let's start here in the front.
Being in the low gravity and going out on spacewalks, does that have a negative effect on your body?
There are a lot of changes that happen to your body when you get into microgravity. When you go up, you have all the fluid that's in the lower part of your body because of gravity redistributes, and you have too much fluid in your body. You get this big, full, fat head feeling, similar to if you hang upside down. You get the chipmunk cheeks and all that. So you get rid of a couple quarts of fluid. I don't know how much. You get rid of some fluid in the first day or so. You spend time in the toilet getting rid of fluid. And also if you have a longer flight, meaning a week or so, you metabolize blood products because you don't need as much because it's all working efficiently. So you come back dehydrated and a little bit anemic. The other thing that happens when you get up there is how your neurovestibular system works, your semicircular canals and your balance. So I'm not a physician, but in your inner ear, you have these little stems or stones that move. If I tilt this way, they trickle this direction and tell my brain that I did this pitch over. And ever since I learned to walk, I understand that sensation means I did this. The only way to get that same sensation when you're floating is to move backwards. So by inertia, the little things move forward. So your brain gets the signal that you did this, but your eyes say, no, you did this. And so that mismatch of signals causes your body to shut down non-essential systems and try to figure out what the heck's going on. So your digestive system shuts down for a lot of people. So a number of people will be sick in the first day or so while their body adapts to that. And for me, after the first night's sleep, I was a space person. I was perfectly adapted to that environment, and it was awesome. When you come back, that has to reverse as well. And that's much slower than dehydration and low blood cell count. You can put that back pretty quickly. But it's really interesting because over the course of the space flight, your brain has learned to depend on your eyes for orientation. It doesn't have anything else it trusts because it knows that your semicircular canals are lying to it, and it doesn't have the sensation of your feet on the floor or your bottom in a seat to say which way you're pointing. So eyes are the only thing. And so when you come back, if you're standing up and close your eyes, you will fall over. You absolutely will, because you have no sensation of what's up, what's down, that will allow you to maintain your balance. And that goes on for a while. One of the things the docs would have us do at the 30-day checkup after flight is close your eyes and stand on one foot. Couldn't begin to do it, even a month after a flight. But it's kind of interesting to play with. Don't close your eyes.
Would it be fair to say that some of the symptoms with space adaptation syndrome are the same that you get with, say, altitude sickness?
Possibly. There's, it's nausea, vomiting, malaise, headaches. Yeah, it kind of sounds like similar to altitude sickness. I don't know that the mechanisms are the same, but it's also similar to a bad hangover. If anybody, I personally would not know, but
Any other questions? Feel free to raise your hand. We will bring the microphone over to you. Let's stick one right back here.
So I got a question about coming back and going there. For you personally, which one was more scary?
Scary?
Going up or coming back?
Launch, you have so much less control. I mean, you're riding this rocket and you're going, particularly before the SRV separate, you're going wherever they take you. I mean, there's no choice. You can't even get off of them because it's kind of like a ball and socket joint. And as long as they are thrusting into that socket, you can't get off of them. So, but it's a short period of time. It's 2 minutes for the solids, and then another 6.5 minutes, and your orbit engine's cut off, and you are in space. Coming back is it's longer. It's maybe 45-minute process depending on where you are, from the deorbit burn until you touch down, and it's more familiar because it's airplane-like in the shuttle. Now, I haven't flown the capsules where you parachute down, but you also have like zero control in that case.
Yeah.
But the shuttle, at least, the pilot and commander had control. And on the longer flights, we would take a computer simulator, landing simulator, so they could practice, because you only get one shot. There's no power on, go around. And so the day before entry, they would practice. And the rest of us would be floating behind them, critiquing their performance and composing our last message home based on how they did. But we trusted them.
Question here.
Do you have any kids is coming before or after?
Have any what?
Kids.
Kids?
Children, yeah.
Yes, I had 2 children before I flew the first time, and then another one 1 year to the day after my first flight.
Oh.
We claim she was a space alien's baby.
That'll end up on YouTube.
Yeah, it's actually in her baby book.
When you come back, do you have to stay in a decompression chamber, and if so, for how long?
No, there's no decompression. So the atmosphere inside the shuttle is unless you're doing an EVA, it's just standard atmospheric pressure like here. So there's no decompression. We don't do isolation because we don't get exposed to anything we didn't take with us. So it's just walk off if you're able. They request that we don't drive home because we're a little bit wobbly for a while. And even a couple of days later, I found I was okay to drive as long as I didn't have to change lanes. So if I could make all right turns where I was going, I was in pretty good shape.
Did you have to do any pre-breathe before a spacewalk to avoid the bends?
Yes, in the spacesuits, we go down to 3.5 pounds per square inch, so like 1/5 of an atmosphere. So before we go into that, we do, in the shuttle, we would drop the pressure in the whole shuttle down to like 10 psi, which is like Denver. So for overnight, and then we would have to do about I can't remember, hour or 2 pre-breathe in the suit, breathing pure oxygen to wash the nitrogen out of our bodies so that we did not get the bends when we dropped down to that low pressure.
Question here.
Do you see the space always dark, or they have daytime or nighttime?
Good question. When you look at the Earth for the first time or any time on a daylight pass, it is so bright you need sunglasses. I mean, it just hits you right in the face. It is so bright because there's no cloud. I mean, there's cloud cover. It doesn't matter. The sun's reflecting off the clouds, so there's nothing obstructs that. If you look the other direction from Earth during the daylight pass, it'll be just total black. But at nighttime, on the night side, where there's not so much light reflecting into the orbiter and we turn off all the lights, you can see like a bazillion stars. It's like being out in the desert on a cold, clear night. You can just see, everywhere you look, you can see stars. And if you look long enough between 2 stars, you'll see another star. I mean, that's pretty much what it looks like. And we used star charts because we used the stars to know our orientation, which way the shuttle was pointing. And so we had star charts on board, and I used to follow along, because you can see the whole night sky in 45 minutes. You don't have to stay up all night. And I'd follow along in the constellations, and I could also see constellations in the southern hemisphere I had never seen. So it was really cool just to sort of walk across the night sky and see all the constellations. So, when William Shatner came back from his flight on whatever it was,
Blue Origin.
Blue Origin, yeah. He mentioned that it's just void. There's just nothing there. And I'm thinking, you need to launch at night, buddy. Of course, when you look out at night, you look out in the sky, you don't see stars in the daytime. Yeah.
Some of the astronauts have said during a night pass, if they looked at the stars long enough, they could perceive a certain depth of perception. Did you experience that?
No, the more I looked, the more stars I saw.
Question here.
Does the whole crew of the space shuttle have to know all the inner workings of the rocket, or just at least one crew member on board in case something breaks?
Very good question. The pilot and the commander know everything about flying it. There's a flight engineer who's a mission specialist who assists in that. So he knows the systems as well and can, assist the pilot and the commander. For other functions like operating the mechanical arm or things, we would typically have 2 people trained. So if it was a one-person job, we'd have somebody trained and a backup in case for some reason the primary person was sick or didn't feel like they could do that. So we'd always generally have redundancy. So the word is fail ops, fail safe. That means if one failure, you're still operational. After 2 failures, you're still safe. So that's kind of the philosophy of flying people in space.
A question here.
How do you make stars?
How do I make stars? I have not personally made stars, but I have seen photographs from Hubble looking out into the universe that show places in the universe where baby stars are being made. And that interstellar dust kind of collapses on itself and forms a blob, and that blob gets tighter and tighter and tighter and eventually becomes a star.
Kat, we have a lot of people come by and they collect mission patches. Now you have a very distinctive patch on your right shoulder. Tell us about that.
This one, I should have worn the other one. This is from my class. So astronauts are selected in classes, anywhere from a dozen to 36, I think is the largest class we had. I was a class of 84, there were 17 of us. So this is our official class patch that had to be approved by NASA headquarters and everybody and make it a nice little patch. We had an unofficial class patch because we became known as the maggots. Affectionately, I might add. We even had, take a maggot to lunch program. Wasn't particularly popular, but our patch was an orbiter and the payload bay was a trash can and had 17 little maggots in spacesuits floating out of it. It's pretty awesome.
Marsha Ivins was a member of that class, and she said every good organization has a Latin motto, and their Latin motto was Quando Adamus, when do we eat?
That's right, that was it.
What's the selection process of becoming an astronaut, and how long is the training?
Good question. It's probably changed over the years, but NASA puts out an announcement that they're selecting the next group, and for me, it was before the internet, so it was fill out a standard SF-171 form like every other civil servant who's ever been hired, some medical stuff, and statement of purpose, all that kind of stuff, like a normal job application, and send it in. And then NASA takes however many thousands of those they get, and they sift through them and toss out the ones who aren't qualified, who don't have a college degree or are, 13 years old or, that sort of stuff. Tell them to wait later, come back a little bit later. And then they would separate the rest into categories. So there was pilot, flight test engineer, life sciences, physical sciences, and a couple others. And then they would wean those piles down to some number that they could interview. In my group, they interviewed, I think, a couple hundred, maybe, in groups of 20. Probably more like 100, in groups of 20. And then out of that, they invited some number to come down for interviews, which were a lot of medical tests mostly, and then an interview with the psychologist and the psychiatrist and the selection board. And out of that came, who knows how they pick people beyond that. I participated in that through the winnowing down of the physical scientist. Our target was to get it down, 200 down to 10, and pass that on to the next level.
Question right here.
Hi. For the woman, can you give me 5 important skills before go to the space?
5 important skills before going to space?
Yes.
Wow. Oh, you have to know what you're doing. You obviously have to be trained and ready to do that. I would say for particularly people with families, men and women, life skills and work balance is important. You know, you have a family, you have a very important job, you have to figure out how to make them both work. What else? You have to be a good team player. For women, you have to, I think, be one of the guys. You know, you have to fit in, you have to do your part, you have to take a little bit of ribbing, brotherly ribbing, I would say. You know, I flew 4 times. There was one woman on my last flight. The rest of the crew were all guys. And it was like a camping trip with 6 brothers. You know, I love every one of them. I'd fly on up with them again if I had a chance. I don't know if I went to 5 yet, but not much different than for the guys.
Any other questions? Feel free to raise your hand. We will bring the microphone to you. Huh? Okay, very good.
Hi, how does it work being a mother? How long were each of your trips, and coming back, how was the adjustment with your kids?
My flights were, I think, 5 days, 9, 11, and 16. So I did not go on a long flight on the space station, but some of the astronauts who have been on space stations are mothers, but they have fathers as well. So, you know, it's like anyone in the military deploying for a period of time or something like that. It is extraordinarily difficult on families because they know something can go wrong. Even little bitty ones can sense that something big is about to happen, and I'm not sure I like it. But they survive it, you know, and you get to feel extraordinarily guilty. It's a pretty selfish profession. I get to have all the fun, and they get to suffer for it. But they did okay with it, and they were happy when I chose not to do it anymore. But they have to. You know, I have 3 daughters, and they grew up to be very competent, confident, independent women, and I couldn't be more proud of them. Despite of my parenting, they've done well. And they're mothers in their own right now, 2 of them.
Susan Gillering told a story. She was at a gathering with her daughter one time, her teenage daughter, and someone asked Susan a question about flying in space, and Susan went to answer it, but before she could, her daughter rolled her eyes and said, "Oh, Mom, not another space story."
Yeah,
Kids get jaded real quick.
I was in a simulator one time right before one of the flights, and it was the second one, and it was one of our last simulations before launch, so we were, you know, focused on what we were doing, and I got a call from our training team, and they said, "You need to call home now." They said they called and they want you to call home now. This was before cell phones, so I run out of the simulator and I go find a phone and I call home and I get, "Mom, how many cans of tomatoes do you put in pot roast?" So you have to celebrate that somebody at home is trying to cook. Yay! So you can't fuss at them. But I went back to the simulator and said, "Why do you guys not get calls like this?"
Question here.
Is it true the body doesn't age as fast in space as it does on Earth?
I would love to believe that. I was only up there for 41 days, so I'm not sure I would know. But I tell you, my theory is, you know, when you go, we launch out east out of here. So we're going from east around to that way. And when you cross the international date line that direction, you go back a day. So I gained a day for every time I did that. So I'm actually 900 days younger than I otherwise would have been.
Sounds good.
It's my story and I'm sticking to it.
There you go. Question right back here.
I just wanted to know what your specialty was, and was your job the same on all 4 missions?
For mission specialists, the job is different for every single mission, which is what makes it fun. By training, I'm a nuclear physicist. I never did a day of nuclear physics after I finished a postdoc, after I got my degree. The first one was classified mission, so I can't tell you. The second one, I did an EVA on that one, did a spacewalk to demonstrate how not to build a space station. That's when the design was sticks and balls, like giant Tinker Toys. It was not a great idea. And then the third one, I was the Hubble service mission, so I did 2 spacewalks on that and installed some instruments. And the last one was the science mission. We had a space lab module in the cargo bay, so we did different science experiments. So it's all very different for mission specialists.
Do you have a favorite job when you're up on any of your 4 missions?
Favorite job? Spacewalks are cool. It's like type 2 fun. It's more fun when you're done.
Yeah.
because they're stressful and they're strenuous and all that, but it's nice to have done it. So I'd have to say that's it.
Question here.
Hi. When you're in space, when you meet your children, do you have any communication with your child? You know, is it phone call or video chat?
Good question. Back in my day, in the first one we had none, but it was only a 5-day mission. After that, we could get email back and forth every day. And then toward the end, we could, once or twice during the mission, we could get a video call to them back and forth. But on the email thing, so at the end of the day, we would write our email home and it would go down to the ground. They would distribute it to our families, and then in the morning we would get a response back up. At the end of the day, you're tired. It's really hard for me to type because normally when you type, your wrist rests on the keyboard. Well, up there, it doesn't rest on anything. So typing for me was a problem, and so most emails are really short for crew members, you know, hi, had a good day, love you, bye, you know, sort of thing. So it was the Hubble mission. I wrote all my emails before we went, and I took them up on a floppy disk, if that can tell you the technology at the time. So I knew when the Girl Scout meetings were, I knew when it was our turn to take snacks, I knew when softball games were, I knew when science projects were due. I was like incredible. We slid by 1 day, so all I had to do was adjust it by 1 day. And so I started sending home these 2-paragraph emails, and the guys were all doing the 1 sentence, love you, bye. And about 3 days into that, a commander called me up to the flight tank. He said, you gotta stop this, you're killing us. They're talking down there.
We have a voice internet protocol telephone on the International Space Station now. And one of the astronauts called his wife, and she picked up her cell phone. She didn't recognize the number that was calling her, so she dumped it over to the voicemail. Question here.
When you from space back to Earth, did you have the quarantine time? Is it stay home or stay in hospital?
And these missions were short, so that we had no rehabilitation like they do on space station. They bring them. The Russians would bring their cosmonauts back. They would lift them out in these couches, and they would go to rehab for a while. The ones who stayed up for a year. As our missions got longer and longer, we figured out we needed to start taking care of people when they came back and rehab them back into a 1G environment a little bit. My missions were short, so 2 weeks was the longest. So no, we just walked out and went home.
If you had the opportunity to fly a 6-month-long mission on station, would you take it?
I would now, yeah. I'm not sure I would when my children were as little as those little folks there, but yeah, for sure. And on this last mission, it was a space lab, so we had maybe 10 times the volume to work in, and half the crew slept while the other half worked, and that's the first time I could imagine wanting to be on space station. Because these others, I was in something like twice the size of a minivan with 6 of my brothers. It was pretty crowded, and I was kind of happy to be home when it was over. But that one, I could imagine long term would have been okay.
Question here.
But what are your missions when you go up? Like you said that you were in the last one for a while. What do you do when you're out there?
We had experiments to do. We were not principal investigators on the experiments, but the science community decides what's going to fly and puts them on there, and we train on how to operate all these experiments. And we are scheduled, on that kind of mission, we are scheduled 12 or 14 hours a day in 5-minute increments. And they finally, after a couple of these missions, working crews pretty hard, decided they had to put in time for a toilet break. Because when nature calls, they got behind schedule. So they had to actually plan for like bodily functions because they were scheduling to that increment throughout the entire workday. So we'd have a 12-hour shift, and then we would have an hour or a half an hour at either end to hand over to the other crew.
One of the questions people ask about a faraway destination is, how's the food? So how is the food, and did you have a favorite item on the menu?
The food it's okay. It's not bad. It just isn't what you're used to, and it gets, kind of old because there's nothing crunchy. Everything's freeze-dried, or some of it's natural state, like M&Ms and goldfish and tortillas and that sort of thing. I learned each crew member on the shuttle flights has a color code. So the pilot is the commander is red and the pilot's blue or whatever, and their food choices, because we got to choose all of our food for the entire mission on short flights like these, and it would be, and have your color code stuck on it. Well, I learned after a flight or two to take some extra stickers, so I could take some other people's food. And then I also learned that the sort of the popular things were dehydrated shrimp cocktail and dehydrated strawberries. So if you take extras of those, you can barter with them. That's kind of the coin of the realm, was the popular food.
Okay, question over here.
So what is the training like and how long does it take?
Training depends on the mission, what you're going to do when you're up there. So there's a lot of what we call pilot pool training. So the astronauts, the baby astronauts, are learning all the systems of the orbiter and the various payloads we fly, and they will do simulations on a regular basis to build up that knowledge. And then when you finish that whole syllabus, you continue going through it to stay current. When you get assigned to a mission, then your training becomes more specific to that mission and that payload. And these days, we were launching a lot of communication satellites, and that was a pretty straightforward thing to do. So the crews would get assigned 9 months to a year before flight, and slowly transition from a little bit of training on their flight and other jobs in the office to only training and getting rid of the jobs in the office over the course of that 9 months to a year for a flight. Space station missions are probably more like 2 or 3 years of training. And it can also depend on whether your mission slips. So you could have a 1-year training cycle, but if your mission keeps slipping, that could go into 2 years or more. So it's hard to say.
Do you remember which one of your missions had the longest training flow?
Probably the science mission did, because we had a lot of different experiments to do on that one. I forgot when I was assigned to that. It was probably 94, and we flew in 95, so it was still not much more than a year. Yeah, that's about it. And we've had some people turn really quickly if we need them. So on my first mission, we were training, and we were 3 months from flying, and our pilot was killed in an airplane crash. So we snagged a pilot that was just coming back from a flight, and then we ended up with a 3-month delay anyway. So he was only with us for 6 months. It was a great flight.
Question here.
Hi. When you're in space, when you feel sick, how do you see the doctor?
How do you see the doctor? We have a conference with the doctor every evening, confidential. Well, it's as confidential as you can get. On the doctor's side, he's supposed to be alone, but amongst our crew, it's hard to have any kind of privacy. So we could discuss any kind of medical stuff once a day with a real doctor. We had a medical kit on board. If we did not have a physician astronaut on the crew, then one person was trained as a crew medical officer to do things like injections and stuff I would hope I would never, God help us if I ever had to do that to anybody, but yeah, we were trained for some stuff there. It's going to be really different going to Mars because they can't turn around and come home. In the shuttle, we could be home within 24 hours if someone had an issue. It's not going to be true when we go longer durations.
Staying on the topic of human factors, tell us a little bit about sleep up on orbit. How is it accomplished, and is it very restful?
You can close your eyes up there and be asleep without going to bed. When you're in school or you're working, and you get drowsy and your head does this, it wakes you up. It doesn't happen. You can just be asleep. We would strap ourselves to the wall, the ceiling, the floor, somewhere in a sleeping bag, which wasn't for warmth, it was more just to contain you, and go to sleep. For me, I didn't have any trouble getting to sleep. Most of the time, I think we would wake up early because you're in a crowded space with a bunch of other people, so it's not like you have this privacy, and also there's fan noises and stuff like that going on. So I think we would reach a level of restfulness, and then we just automatically wake up early. On the Space Lab mission, we were 16 days, scheduled 14 hours a day, and I think we had 2 periods of off time, like 3 hours during that whole 2 weeks. That was our weekend. It was 3 hours somewhere in there, we had the crew module really cold because of some experiments that were in there. So I wrapped myself up in all my warm stuff, and I strapped myself to the front of one of the crystal growth furnaces that was putting out a lot of heat and took a nap. That was my time off, because I found I did come back really tired, needing some more rest.
Question here.
Were any of your missions in the stratosphere?
No, we were all above that. So I can't remember what the lowest would have been. Hubble was the highest, which is like 350 nautical miles or something. And the lowest safe altitude is about 100 miles that you can maintain for 24 hours. So we were well above that in every case.
Okay, question in the back here.
So I'm curious. Usually when there's a mission in progress on the news, it's mostly focused on the U.S. But in reality, are there other nations that are also having missions simultaneously with you? And does that create a problem or interference?
China has a space station, and they have taikonauts up there now. The Russians did have an independent space station, and they had folks up there now. There's no other capability to send humans to orbit from Earth than the Russians, the Chinese, and the U.S. right now. There's lots of stuff up there now that doesn't involve people, and it's a traffic management issue, and will become even more if we don't all get together and figure out rules of the road.
Question here.
Follow up on what you were just saying on your first mission. Did that interfere with your conviction of why you're a NASA astronaut, since it was a classified mission and you had to do something for the Department of Defense involving China and Russia?
I didn't involve China and Russia. If I did, I wouldn't tell you. I worked for the Department of the Army as an intelligence analyst before I went to NASA. So I believe in national defense and that we played a part in it happily.
One of the neat things I'm told about being on a DoD flight is you're pretty much insulated from the press and all the reporters and so forth. A lot of comfort in that.
Yeah, that's the best part. The most terrifying thing I ever had to do as an astronaut was a press conference. And in Department of Defense classified missions, we didn't do any of that stuff. Our air-to-ground communications were not released to the whole world, so we could be more candid talking down to mission control. We had the best time. We laughed through all the training, but man, when it got to coming out of the 10-minute hold before launch, it was all business, instantly all business. And we did our job, and we did it really well. I can't tell you about it, but you would thank me if I did. And it was a great mission. I loved it.
Good crew.
Yeah.
In space station, they have a washroom or restroom in the inside.
There's a toilet, just like there was on the shuttle. There are no showers. People don't shower. They just sort of do a bird bath, wash off, because there used to be showers in Skylab, our first space station, in the 70s. And it was like this tube you had to pull up and fasten it here and then squirt water and do whatever you do in the shower. And then you had to vacuum up all the water. You couldn't let it loose because it would float around and get into electronics. And it turned out to be more problems than it was worth, and so nobody used it. So on shuttle and space station, there aren't any showers, but there is a toilet. You have to have that. That's a life support thing. Yeah.
Bill Pogue used a shower on board Skylab, and he said that the nozzle that he had for the water disbursement, you push the trigger and you get one spray of water. So he said first time he held it out like that, he pushed the trigger, and the water came out as a spray, but halfway to him it all coalesced into a single blob and hit him in the chest like a glob of Jello.
Wow.
Yeah.
I hadn't thought about that.
It's really neat to watch water and things like that play around in microgravity.
A lot of unexpected things happen.
Question here.
The experiments you did on the last one, did they try the experiments on Earth before they took them into the space lab to see what the difference was?
I'm sure there were controls on all those things, on the growth and things like that, but there's some things you just can't do on Earth. One of them we did, which was really fun, was drop physics module. So it was a cube about this big, like 6 inches on a side, and it had little speakers in it, like little tiny stereo speakers. And we could inject a drop of liquid in that, and we could control that just with sound waves. So we could smash it flat as a pancake, or we could spin it up till it blew apart. We could set it so that there were 2 resonances in there, put 2 drops in, and then force them together and coalesce. And so a lot of the physics of liquids in orbit, like Nick was just talking about, they're learning about that. Some of it had to do with surfactants, which are molecules that change the surface property of a liquid, but not necessarily the bulk property. And they're important in things like shampoo, for instance, has surfactants in it. So if we take this round, the spherical blob, and we smash it flat, we increase the surface to volume ratio. So those little molecules have to migrate from the bulk of the liquid to the surface. And then if we released it and let it go back to a sphere, that's a lower surface to volume configuration. So then all those little molecules had to work their way back down into the liquid. And so by the way that oscillated, they could determine how those things were moving in the bulk of the liquid. There's some other things where we would simulate atmospheric conditions, where we had two concentric spheres with oil between them, and we could make that act like the atmosphere of a planet. We could change the artificial gravity by changing the voltage between the two spheres and spin it and watch it. It was cool, like watch weather patterns develop. So you could change it to the atmosphere of Jupiter or the atmosphere of Earth just by changing the voltage. It's simulation, of course, it's not real, but you can't do that on Earth. There's no control for that on Earth.
Did you ever do any of the flame experiments up on orbit?
We did light some of the drops in a glove box, yeah. That was really fun because we'd have a drop of liquid and constrain it on a wire so it didn't go floating around. And it was in a glove box because you don't generally like balls of fire floating around inside spacecraft. It's a no-no. But some of the drops were a mixture of fuels and they had different ignition points. And so when you got a drop burning, you could still see the liquid drop. You could see the area outside of that sphere that was the vaporized fuel. And then outside of that, you would see sort of a shell of flame, like candy on an M&M. And you could watch the liquid get smaller and smaller and smaller as it was being consumed until it finally became too polluted by the byproducts of combustion, which is water, to maintain the flame, so it would just put itself out. And if you had two fuels mixed together that had different ignition points, you would see this flame on one, and you could see the little drop starting to bubble, 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 and then you see a second flame front come out as you reach the ignition temperature of the second fuel that was in there. That was fun to watch as well.
Any other questions? Feel free to raise your hand. We will bring the microphone to you right here.
I was wondering how your experience as an astronaut influenced your teaching career. You made a transition to teaching engineering. You mentioned some parts of mathematics that were highly abstract, weren't as of interest. I wondered, did you find yourself, I'm just curious how that made it influence your career.
I used my experiences shamelessly, I have to say. So when you're teaching orbital mechanics, and you're talking about how satellites move around, which is cool, but you have to get it down to the differential equations of motion, of why this is what it is, and the class would be going, and when I was in space, and I'd have their attention for another 20 minutes before I had to throw another thing out there to wake them up. I enjoyed working with the undergraduates. They were just fun.
Any other questions? Feel free to raise your hand. We'll bring the microphone to you. Kathy, we see this program now, the Artemis program, which is getting underway. We're going to send 4 astronauts to orbit the moon next year, and then after that, a crew to land on the moon. What do you see as the benefits of this lunar program? What are we looking to accomplish with this Artemis program?
We're going to the moon, in my opinion, to learn what we need to learn to go to Mars. We need to test systems where we have the option of bailing out and being home in 3 or 4 days versus going to Mars when there's no bailout associated with that. We need to learn about the medical and physical body aspects of longer duration missions out in the world, but I hope that it is a stepping stone to going to Mars. There are moon huggers, lunar lovers, who want to, and rightfully so, who want to go to the moon to study the moon. And I understand that. I just hope we don't get stuck there. And that's all we do.
Yeah, it'd be pretty easy to get comfortable in one area and just say, well, let's not go farther just yet, right?
Yeah, we've been in low Earth orbit for 40 years.
Yeah.
So I don't want to get stuck on the moon for 40 years and don't go anywhere else. Because I only have till 2039. I'm counting on it.
Make a difference
Mhm.
for a flight.
Yeah, a lot of things about the space station, and the reason we're doing that is to study the human body and what the consequences of being in microgravity are, what to do about it. And then when we go to Mars, we're going to have months in zero gravity en route, and then we're going to get there, and there's gravity there. And there's no team there to help you get out and rehabilitate you to get you ready for it. You got to be ready to hit the ground running with that. So the concerns are, there's all kinds of things they're finding with these longer duration flights. Radiation exposure is a concern. They're looking at changes to vision, damage to the optic nerve, or retina that they're looking at now for people who've been up there for a while. Their vision changes in orbit. For some people it goes back when they get back on Earth, for other people it doesn't. So that's a couple of things, and I'm sure there are more. The radiation exposure, OSHA considers astronauts to be radiation workers. And so we were supposed to keep dosimeters on us all the time. And if you reached your career limit, you were done flying. And I think a few people have. I didn't come close to it, but a few people have. So my theory that I try to get them to accept is that, you know, death is one per person. And if you ride rockets, your chances of dying of cancer go way down. They didn't buy that.
We were talking to Story Musgrave a few years ago about this idea of conditioning, and he was asked what sort of conditioning you do going to go to another planet. He says it depends upon what kind of body you want when you arrive. Do you want a 1/3 G body? Do you want a 1/6 G body? So he was an advocate of doing this kind of conditioning en route, so you wouldn't have that time of that long time of adaptation once you got there.
Yeah. And astronauts do training and physical stuff on orbit on the space station. They have I think, an hour of aerobic training a day and an hour of strength training a day that they have to do up there.
They actually have a weight machine on the station. People say, well, how do you lift weights in zero gravity? Well, the weight machine has air pistons like shock absorbers, and you push against that resistance. You set the resistance and you push against that. And they've been coming back home in pretty good shape.
Yes, but that machine is too heavy to go to Mars, so that's why they have to figure out, how to do it with less mass.
We got time for one more question. If you have it, feel free to raise your hand, and we will bring
This young
the
man has one.
microphone over to you. Right over here, young man in the blue.
If you were on the moon and you dropped a feather and like a rock, would they hit the ground at the same time?
It's been done.
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, if you
The acceleration of gravity is the same. It doesn't matter whether you're a feather or you're a weight. The difference that it makes here on Earth is that there's a lot of drag on the feather. So if you drop a feather in a bowling ball here, they would hit at different times because the feather would be doing this. But there's no air up there to cause that drag.
Now, in 15 minutes, Kathy will be over at the Universe Theater giving a formal presentation, which will include slides and video and more stories about life and work in space. So we invite you to come by and see that show. She's got to go over and get ready for that show now, so regretfully, she'll not have time here for handshakes, photographs, or autographs. However, at 12 noon, Kathy will be up on the second floor of the gift shop, and there she will be signing autographs. We want to take this opportunity to thank you all very much for coming by and bringing such great questions with you. And we also want to thank our special guest for today, astronaut Kathy Thornton.